Nobody raises their hand. Would anybody like to ask the questions to start off with?
There you go.
Of course not.
Okay.
I have a question.
Great.
Why do you all sit so far?
Very good. We asked them not to sit close because
Oh,
I'm not,
Got it.
I can't afford
Okay, I can afford it.
it. Okay, so I'll start, which is usually what happens anyway. And then you guys can talk about whatever you want, and you can, I'm gonna ask this question to any one of you sitting here. I was thinking today, today was the first time since I was diagnosed a month and a half ago that I was able to just get myself to be able to play the piano, because I'm sort of more organized in how I'm going about all my infusions and my diet and, falling into a pattern which I assume will last through September. But when I went to the piano and started to play, it was just so much joy involved. And so it's not only the sound of music, as in The Sound of Music, we all know that movie, but it's the physical and emotional feeling. It's the energy that comes between oneself and the music and just the atmosphere. And so I've always felt a little bit that when I play the piano anyway, that it makes me, no matter what I'm playing, even if I'm just fooling around and making stuff up, it makes me a richer person. And it has to do with this trading of energy on many levels. And so like if you're playing Beethoven, it's sort of, I'm not able to practice without a lot of imagination, because I like going on my trips. For better or worse, I like my trips. And I think that opens the door to receiving a much richer experience, and it also opens the door as, for you to really make your own identity, leave your own fingerprint on what you're saying to the audience, which is, of course, the whole idea. We're not trying to be Xerox copies. So I thought I would start by asking, how do you nurture imagination when you teach? Because I have always, so many students get stuck, or they wait for, how should I phrase this, or they practice they learn the notes like it's a homework assignment, and then they add all of the good stuff later. So I don't know who wants to address this first. We got a lot of people here, so we're gonna have a lot of people.
I think we can start by thinking to what Professor Ungar said yesterday. The student class was right in that direction. And anything that can help you feeling what you're playing is incredibly helpful then for the listener, because they live through the music what you're playing. There's a nice story that I heard from Fleischer about Schnabel. And Schnabel was saying that the musician should be like a mountain guide. Sometimes I say this in lessons. A mountain guide with a group of people following the mountain guide. The mountain guide knows how to go to the top of the mountain. He knows all the tricks. Then he gets there at the top of the mountain, and then he tells the people, okay, so here, this is your landscape, I'll go. So in Schnabel's mind, the performer should be just a bridge between the music and the audience. Now, this was many years ago. What I tell my students, I took the liberty to add a little bit of something to the story. So I tell my students, then don't go away as a mountain guide once you reach the top. Stay there and tell them this is Mount Kilimanjaro, that's Pacific Ocean. So help them to understand what you're doing through the music. Guide them even more, even when they hear the music. Guide them, helping them with your personality. But this means, of course, that you know the score, like a GPS. And you know exactly where to go. You have ideas. And you know how to vehicle those ideas to the audience, because as Professor Giles was speaking about that, sometimes we're too much in our thoughts, and it's so well shaped what we do for us, but then people who are listening to us, they don't understand it. So the communication, of course, is extremely important too. But I'm sure they have some things to say.
I think that much of the imagination is, you were talking about how do we nurture it in teaching, and much of the imagination is lost in your practicing. I think practicing has become something overly technical. I mean, personally, I believe in musical practicing. You have to practice. Of course, the very beginning stages are a little bit, rigid and technical. I mean, you read the score, but right away, I think right in the beginning, I personally don't believe in adding the music later, so much later. I think you have to immediately make sense of your phrases and practice phrases, practice the shape of the phrases, practice each phrase exactly what is there, what is the sound, what is the nuances. I mean, a little bit less emphasis on only finger dexterity practicing, but combine it immediately with the musical, with the musical component of the phrase, of the piece. I think practicing is.
I agree with that idea of this holistic learning, even from the earliest stages. Choosing fingerings is really a musical decision. Decide after you've read through the piece a few times. So even from the earliest stages. But I think imagination, it changes maybe not only based on the person and his or her age, but also how long you've had the piece. As young people, you are necessarily learning a lot of repertoire. You don't get to play your pieces very much before you go on to the next piece, because you have to expand your repertoire. The good news is, as you get older, you get to, well, it's not that you should practice less, but you tend to play the same pieces a little more frequently because you don't have time to learn the repertoire. And this is a wonderful thing in a way, because your imagination grows. You get into a comfort zone, and new things occur to you. If you're teaching the music, it's another wonderful and incredibly valid way to approach the score from a different perspective, and to develop a vocabulary to describe what you want to hear. This helps to fire the imagination as well. I think teaching is a very important skill for everyone to learn. So perhaps it depends for me on the stage at which a person...
I'm going to suggest a completely opposite point of view, which is to learn a piece without any assumptions. I learned this from playing music that I have never heard, that I might never have been able to hear. It's different from learning the Goldstein sonata, which you have probably heard, even when you're 20 years old, 100 times already. So the idea is to look at the notation and say, well, what does it mean? It's like a puzzle. Why is this forte here? I don't know at the beginning. Or what does this slur mean? Does a slur mean the first note is louder? Or does it mean that it's going to the second note? And you ask these questions, and in a way, by thinking about all the possibilities, how loud is this forte? Is it an angry forte? Is it just a little accent? Is it a number of people have come into the room? You open yourself up to a lot of different possibilities. So I think there's also an argument to be made for coming to a piece where your mind is a blank slate, looking at what's in front of you.
I think that your question was for us, our imagination when we teach, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, I was really about, I mean, what I like what you said, Ursula, this comes back to an idea that I really need to put into effect. People arrive, you all arrive here, and we're going to hand you a piece that you never heard before, that you can't hear anywhere in the world. It was just written, and you're going to go for an hour in your practice room and start to figure it out. So that's really the important thing, because you have to use some imagination in order to do that. But I know from my own teaching experience that I've built this highway of imagination that now turns on for me when I practice all the time. So it was just, I had some wonderful teachers, of course, but I don't know if when you're practicing, if you stop and you say, okay, how can I do this differently? Maybe I could phrase this differently. What if I change the dynamics? What if I change the tempo? What if I change you have to sort of get out of your basic routine. Comfort zone, yeah. So I was really, because teaching a piece and using your own imagination, which we all do, doesn't necessarily turn their imagination on. There's like another key that needs to be made, their key to their own imagination.
Well, I've always found from a very early age, there's an underlying current of love of music, which can be destroyed by endless practicing. And I never had that. I mean, there are times when I'm hoping that the next person doesn't come, but when the next person comes and starts anything, I am totally immersed in music. All my life, the love of music has kept me going. And I have found through that inspiration. I feel awed by these great composers. I mean, they're giants, and as I go on with age, it's even worse. You know what I mean? I wish I could have another 20 more years, for God's sake, of this feeling, of this. How could it happen? How could somebody come up with this incredible melody, this incredible harmony, this surprise? All the time I'm thinking about Michelangelo doing David. How did he see this massive marble, and out of that comes this incredible thing? One thrown chisel and it's gone. And yet he created something which is, but Beethoven created that too. I think that if you can pass on this love to students, this not only respect, but this deep emotional commitment that these are music, every note, there's not one note somebody writes just to write it. Every note has been thought out, felt, and if you can pass that on, let's hope that the immense amount of practicing they do turns into suddenly a feeling of, maybe I should feel this too now. But you're right, it's hard to pass it on. But I demonstrate it all the time, that it is a joy, a blessing. Everything what you want in life is centered on these great pieces, these masterworks, these great moments.
If we're talking about imagination in terms of teaching, I find my own imagination when I'm practicing and the imagination of teaching someone else is similar but not the same. I think one of the things that, as a teacher that continues to make this great music vital is that every time someone walks in the room with Beethoven, and I've taught it 100 times, I'm sure, and it comes in through a different prism of a new person and a new way of that person listening. And if you think about the talent, I'm not very fond of the word talent, actually, but for not having the benefit of using a different word, everybody has strengths and weaknesses in how you evaluate musical ability. So sometimes some people have spectacular ears, some people have pitch recognition, some people can hear anything. Some people have a hand that just is built for playing the piano. Some people have an intellect that is remarkable. Some people have a spirit that just reacts and immediately responds to music. And so every time Beethoven walks through the door in the form of a new student, one of the joys is meeting this person where they are and relating this music that has been here for 250 years and has transcended its own culture. And, in 2000, I've said this, so some of you, if you've heard this from me before, sorry, but in the year 2000, Carnegie Hall had scheduled 100 all Beethoven concerts to celebrate the 250th birthday, and nearly all of them got canceled because of the pandemic. And when concerts were able to start again, most of them were rescheduled. And it made me think that for everybody sitting in this room, the pandemic that we just lived through was life-altering, and it was something that will always be remembered in our own lives. But for the music of Beethoven, it was a relatively less difficult thing to overcome. It wasn't a world war, it wasn't a Holocaust, it wasn't bombs falling on the library where the scores were. It wasn't so we've had a technical revolution. It wasn't the 19th century technical revolution, which was even bigger probably than what we're going through now. But this music has, and it all started with someone who was deaf. It just is the emotion and the imagination is built in because this music has transcended century after century and event after event, and it still survives. And the most recent, perhaps, is that this music was completely banned for 30 years during the Cultural Revolution in China, and now China is the place that is probably most actively practicing and performing music. There's something about the music that lends itself to imagination because it's lived so much longer than we have. And teaching that is such a privilege to someone else. And so I think imagination of explaining things to someone else stimulates one's imagination. I think it's sometimes hard for me to have the same imagination when I'm practicing that I have the imagination when I'm teaching.
And which brings up the point, how many people here have a student or two? How many people here are teaching? Raise your hand. Right, so if it would be wonderful if you would all teach, you don't have to teach 15 hours a week, you can teach 1 hour a week, because what you will receive so many gifts that will help you, and you will receive so much pleasure and so much happiness when you see that one word can change a whole person's whole life, that you would, one suggestion, it doesn't matter whether the student is 5 or 3 or 15 or 81, I'm sure there's somebody that would like to have lessons.
And if I may add to all of these wonderful things we just heard, for all of us, I think the danger when practicing is to get too focused on proficiency, which is important, of course, but it's not the end all, it's not end game. And when it comes to imagination, I think I always try to remind myself and my students that the vehicle to express emotions and to paint pictures and ideas is sound. So to focus on sound and all of the myriad colors in the sound and all of the nuances and the possible layers and then the other thing is to think a little bit outside of the scope of the piano. The piano is an instrument that encompasses many other instruments. You can be like thinking of a full symphony orchestra while playing the piano. That already helps to imagine things a little bit differently when looking at a piano score. And then perhaps this is stating the obvious, but I think it's also very important to look at a composer and at a work of art like a composition, trying to also put it in place in its time and to see what else was going on in literature and the visual arts and everything else that was going on, because that influenced the composers, but it also can teach us a lot on how to play that work better. So.
Yeah, speaking of that, I always tell my students we should try to understand what the composers thought, not just what they wrote, because they wrote something that comes because of their position in the society, what they wanted to say, exactly what Antonion said. And many times we just, if we do it, we just do what it's written in the score, which is not enough.
Context.
Mm-hmm.
And notation is limited.
Mm-hmm.
That's the best part of it.
Yeah, exactly.
But I think the printer score is only a suggestion.
Mm. Starting point.
Technically, a strong suggestion,
Right.
but still is. You do what it says, but then you have to start to find out why. Why does he want an accent there? And what type of accent is it?
And you know, when you start to do this, if it's score as a starting point, you know, all of you are going to have different reactions. I mean, it's like if you take that, if each one of you came up and played the opening of whatever you want to play that you all knew, even if it's Happy Birthday, everybody sounds different on the piano. And that has to do with your, I don't know, I mean, you know, it's really hard to explain why everybody is different. It has to do with your own energy, or who you are, all of these things that are kind of intangible that go along with the tangible. So it's a really special blend, and I think that you have to appreciate that in each, all of you have to appreciate that inside yourself. Because every one here is unique.
Mm-hmm.
We have that innate uniqueness.
In response to what you just said about the score is limited, and you said that's such a good theme. You know, think about it for a second. If we want to get louder or we want to get softer, there's only 2 words, right? If we want a new dynamic, there's basically six things that we could say if we were going from pianissimo to fortissimo, and so the fact that it's limited is actually what creates the imagination, because you know, you see a 2-note slur, or you see a staccato. There's 20 ways to play staccato,
Yes.
and
Only?
yes, yeah. I only have 10 fingers. No, but it's the imagination comes from doing what's in the score, because you have to make a decision about what that actually means, because it's such a broad set of instructions.
I always say to the student, look outside, you see a tree. What is the color? Green. How many greens are there? All right, that's forte. Now, and then there are millions of colors of green now. Depends on the sunshine, if it's in the shade, if it's this or that. You put it into context, and then you say, that's what makes us different. How we perceive a certain instruction as such. But there's suggestion. But there's so many ways of doing it.
For instance, I'm colorblind. Literally.
You wouldn't survive my class.
Probably. But what I do is to imagine colors, like dynamics as colors, which I don't know. It's not that I see black and white. I see the colors, but I don't know what they are. It's just a common thing. Many people have it. But I have perfect pitch, so probably, you know, nature gave me something.
Do you name your colors?
I can't.
So you don't know, but even though you're colorblind, you have a concept of red.
I have a concept.
But it's your own concept.
Right.
But so you can't see it, so you can't show it.
No. So, for instance, I don't know if you ever did the test. They do tests with letters or numbers with so many little circles. I've never seen anything there.
So when you go shopping, you take your wife.
Like the light, I know the red is up.
Oh, that's good.
That's a good. But I mean, my own relationship with colors was always with imagination.
Yeah.
And in music, I found that incredibly helpful, because I feel the nuances even if I don't see them. And it's just some bad thing that became a strength for me.
There are so many things. I believe I went to a concert with a a blind percussionist.
Yeah, that's unbelievable. That's
You
unbelievable.
know, I don't know her name.
Evelyn
but-
Glenn.
Yes,
Of course.
yes. I
She
mean,
feels vibrations.
Yes,
with
yes, she
her
feels the
feet.
vibration, but she is spot on.
That's unbelievable.
Absolutely. Yeah.
That's,
Well, I had a student in North Carolina School of the Arts, she's, I still kind of with her, she was tone deaf, I mean,
Yeah.
and she,
Deaf.
well, she was,
Deaf. I thought
Deaf,
about that.
deaf.
Yes,
she
you're right.
was remarkable because her brother was a violinist, she was a pianist. She played chamber music like unbelievable, and she could even play for him, even he was two studios down, through a closed door. It was amazing. I mean, I would demonstrate it. She played Brahms Handel variations in Chopin B flat minor sonata on her recital. And I could start anywhere. She would just pick
You're
it
talking
up.
about a blind pianist.
No, she was deaf.
Yes, deaf. Oh.
I went to her hearing test. I thought maybe she wasn't completely deaf, but it was that she went deaf from measles when she was young. And she had perfect pitch, even though she was deaf. And that was just some kind of vibrational thing.
Yeah.
And it's amazing. I've never ever come across a person like as developed. And I mean, it's hard to explain, but
Yeah.
she compensated so well.
Well, I feel the same way about a blind pianist. I had a blind pianist who, I played the left hand, recorded it, the right hand, and the metronome. And within a week, brought the whole sonata back. And then I had to teach her that this is louder or softer, and then she got the idea. But that's how she learned.
well, and winner of Landklavier.
Well, no, yeah.
Noble he's completely,
Yeah.
and I think he was doing Hammerklavier with one hand. The beginning of one Hammerklavier,
Yeah.
which, we do ta-ta.
But you
ta-ta.
know,
Well, you have to do it without looking.
different relationships, different spatial understanding. Okay, so it's your turn to ask the question. Who has a question? It's impossible that you don't have something you would like to ask. A hand is up. Yes, David.
Do you think with the development of technology and social media, have we reached a point where we're overexposed to content nowadays? Not just in music, but in general.
Over what? Sorry.
Overexposed.
Overexposed to content, so recordings and
You're not forced to listen. You're not forced to be on Facebook. It's your choice. And you can choose to abstain. Or you can choose, I sometimes have a question, let's say about the tempo of a certain movement, and I'll listen to 4 different pianists just play a couple measures. And then I'll think, well, that seems to be the range. What would I do? But I don't listen to the whole piece. I just ask a question. I never listen as a background. I mean, always if I'm listening, it's because I want to hear something, or I have a question, or I want to know who did what.
And I mean, growing up, when we didn't have any of that, it was bad. I mean, to find a good recording of anything, where I was born, I mean, I had to befriend the curator of the public library, and then he would make copies for me on cassette tape that I could take home. And there was obviously no internet, but in my particular hometown, there was not even a good music store where I could go buy recordings. And so it was whatever my teacher could pass along, but it was very limited. And now everything is out there. The only problem I find is that, especially with younger students, probably even younger than you, they don't know who to listen to. They take as their reference the wrong people, if I may say. With the treasure trove of enormous wealth of recordings from all the greats, from basically Rachmaninoff onward, and they listen to some semi-obscure kid who won a competition and plays like a machine. It's a bit frustrating sometimes, and also often they don't know who is playing. They say, "Oh, I've heard this pianist do this," and I said, "Who is it?" Don't know. So that's also frustrating. But to just very briefly to complete the answer to your question is, if you are referring specifically to being overexposed to social media and to information, I think the worst thing that did, in my experience, is that it reduced the attention span. Now people seem not to be able to pay attention for more than a few seconds, and they have to be on something else. And that's a bit scary.
I think, to answer the question quickly, I think absolutely yes. We are all, there's so much to tune out because we are overexposed, and there's this constant noise in our lives, and so much of it is coarse and ugly and cheap and takes us away from our inward, our higher selves, which is what we need to be working on in our music. And I think the challenge is to try to find a way to shut out everything that is not helpful, the things that are not really helping us to grow. I mean, yes, there's room for entertainment, but I just find, between social media, which I'm not on, and TikTok and all of the other things that are in the palm of our hands, not to mention cable news and all of the other things going on in our world, it's a challenge to just stay focused on what we're doing. But I think Antonio is absolutely right in that you are so fortunate to have in the palm of your hand virtually everything that's been recorded for the piano and everything else. And I think, I wish that more of your generation would take advantage of that, because just to give yourself context of what you're playing. So, and I was telling somebody this story just recently, but I had a student years ago, and when my students figure out that when I ask, who did you listen to, that they need to remember who they listened to on YouTube. Then they remembered the name, and I said, oh, so who's your favorite recording? And they said, oh, it was Nathan Smith. And I thought, well, who's Nathan Smith? And it was just some random guy who, in his living room, who had uploaded. And I guess he was first on the YouTube algorithm, above Bellini and Ashkenazi.
It doesn't take much to gather millions of views, and you go and see Arthur Rubinstein, maybe only like a few hundred or maybe a few thousand.
Well, and that's the thing about YouTube is that it equalizes everybody. So, Nathan Smith is equal with all of the great pianists in history. So if you don't know who those pianists are,
exactly,
you don't know who to click. So that is a potential.
But I think now is a really important time to listen to live performances of your friends. They may not be as perfect as a performance of Rubinstein or Horowitz or Bellini, but it's alive and it's in real time. And thank goodness the pandemic is behind us. It was a horrible time. And now we can go to concerts and hear our friends. And if we say, I can play that better than so-and-so, go ahead and do it.
Another question? Yes.
I asked this question at the last time of the Q&A, but are there any musical books or sources that you think every pianist should have or read?
My most recent book was the Chopin Life and Times with Alan Walker. I think everybody who wants to play, I mean, Alan is an amazing storyteller, if you like. His books on Liszt, 3 volumes, are fantastic, but he worked on this for 10 years, and from my point of view, he incorporates quotations from other pianists when they heard Chopin. And that is very informative, because Chopin brought to pianism something totally new within 3 to 4 years of Beethoven's death. And we kind of look on the history of music, and within 3 years, this person brought something extraordinary to Paris, and everybody was mesmerized by the difference he had to all the other pianists. And if you read it, then you are playing of Chopin and informed of the times that he lived in. It would be very helpful. It's a thick book, but you can get through it in the summer.
Not as big as the list ones.
Oh, the list is 3 volumes.
But they're amazing, yeah. But then I also would quickly suggest any time that a composer, there's a correspondence with somebody and that gets published, the letters of each composer, just get your hands on them.
Yeah, like Schumann's diary.
Yeah.
I find out none of my students know Schumann's diary, which is, you know, real life conversation. Clara telling Robert that he's a child. This is life. And we look at Schumann like, you know, the composer, but he was a real person.
Yep.
So reading about them is just unbelievable.
That's what I mourn the most, that we have text and email, and composers still write to each other, but we don't know anything, and we will never know about it.
I would like to recommend the books of Charles Rosen. They have been very important for me, and I refer to them a lot in my teaching. Probably I've assimilated so many of the ideas that I forget that a lot of what I say is not actually me, but it's Charles Rosen. But Ursula was, of course, friends with him, I think.
Yeah.
But the classical style and the romantic generation are the 2 books that I would start with. And it's very erudite and it can be wonky a little bit, but if you're a musician, you can get through it. But I think he writes in an engaging way about music. It's smart, but it's not dry, in my opinion.
Another way to approach music is to study a lot of harmony. I know most of you are in music schools. You're required to take a certain amount of harmony. Take more. The more you get, the more you understand what a composer is doing. And it's it is more interesting to understand it for yourself, even than to have someone say, look at this extraordinary harmony. If you can understand it and feel it the first time you read through a piece, that will give you an incredible amount of knowledge about how to play and to stimulate your imagination.
Another question? No?
No?
Yes.
I wanted to ask professors from both conservatories here in the US and in Europe, what do you think is, like, are there any very important differences in the way of teaching of different continents?
Well, I mean, I probably should answer this. You know, music is very, very universal. The only difference that I'm finding really is that I have more Western students, so not as many students from Asia in Europe than here in America. But other than that, I feel that music is so universal, and the willingness of you to learn incredibly well is universal. So the level, I have to say, has been raising. It's always higher than before. Attention to details is always higher than before. Technique is always higher than before. Knowledge of music, instead, I feel that is also universal, is not growing. So I see this in Europe, and I saw this in America as well. And that's what we're trying to fight. Because the future of music, of course, is not playing faster Chopin etudes than what they did 100 years ago. Because if we continue like this, then we would not recognize the pieces anymore. I always say that if Chopin would come here and listen to the Chopin International Piano Competition, it was probably he would be disgusted in many cases. But of course, time is evolving. So, I mean, we have the mission to help you shaping your musical needs and your musical thoughts in the best possible way, so that we don't forget this music. But I have to say, the level is very, very similar between here and America.
And the teaching style.
Teaching style, you know, I don't think I have a teaching style.
I mean, in general, other people.
Yeah,
Do you think it's the same? Or
I think it depends on the teacher.
It
no?
depends on the
Because,
teacher
for
very
example,
much.
you have European
Yeah.
teachers teaching here, and you have like people from other countries teaching over there. People move around. I mean, it's
Right.
very international, and it depends on who you study with. I think
Yeah.
mostly.
Yeah.
But I know why you said you don't have a teaching style. I think I know what you mean, and I think I agree if that's what you mean. It's like you absorb all of the possible influences from all over, and then you also try to tailor your approach to the individual student. And yes, you might have guiding principles, but you know, I also don't believe, like, schools exist, like the Russian school, the Neapolitan school, this and that school, but it's also a lot depends on the filters of the individual, and you absorb influences from so many different places.
Yeah, and then the students are all different. So
That's
if
right.
you think that you have a style that will fit a student, then it doesn't work maybe with the other one. So yes.
I mean, I think the important thing to remember is that, you know, music is a mother tongue.
Yeah.
All of us. And regardless of where we were born or how we speak music, you know, some people speak music a little bit this way, music a little that way. And it's not so much as a hodgepodge, but I mean, we all change and adapt with the times, and the mother tongue is changing. Just because we're alive and we're going through a period of whatever period we're in, and then if you look back in history, you see that mother tongue music, the pitch was changed, this and that and the other thing. So, you know, the aliveness of the mother tongue, of course, is there, and we will find differences in different countries, but that's to be celebrated.
Mhm. Yeah, music is universal for sure.
But I think there is, I wouldn't call it a homogenization necessarily, but the world is smaller today.
Yep.
You know, if you listen, and it was easier to stereotype pianists and probably teaching if you listen to Casadasu and Giles and Kempf. You can say, well, they're representative of a certain school. That's a Germanic, that's a Russian, that's a French. And I sense my ears tell me that's not quite as true today. There's not really a French way and a German way.
And it's like McDonald's, for God's sake, everywhere.
Better than that.
Huh?
Better than that.
Well, I'm just joking, of course. I think that you're absolutely right. It's up to the teacher, up to the and the student, what they're looking for. There's no such thing as a Russian school anymore. It's a mixture of things happening.
Yeah. I have to say pianos in Europe are a little better, if I may.
We got
In the
Hamburg.
cons-
We got Hamburg at our
I know,
school.
in some schools.
In some schools. No, no.
But each of you also has a personal style.
Yeah.
To some extent, the teachers want the style to be variable according to what you're playing, but even as you do that, you will play it in your own way. And that's very exciting.
I think that the major problem growing up is that you don't believe that your ideas are valid, and who wants to hear it anyway? Beethoven was played by Kempf, and Beethoven was played by Brendel. Who wants to hear my version? But that's the wrong attitude, because you have just as much to give as they. They are more in the limelight, they are more recorded perhaps, but your performance, I often say that I go to famous people play, recording artists, and I come away, wasn't a total waste of time. But then I go to a student concert and I'm absolutely baffled. What happened? I never heard such playing. And I rejoice at that. I really do, because that person shows their personality. Something happens on stage that you can't replicate in recording studios. I know you record a lot, but I think live music is so live, and it's so wonderful when things happen, even if it's not the way you want it, but it is. You never know at the time if you don't want it that way. It might be the best thing you've ever done. But I think we should be celebrating this incredible choice we have to be surrounded by music. Instead of making it into some of you, I have to practice 10 hours. Well,
Speaking of recordings, we didn't touch this topic, but I think this is important. I'm currently reviewing the videos for the pre-screening for the list in Weimar, list competition. And you don't know how many videos are completely useless. And I mean, I can see the effort from the student to play all the right notes because they know that the video needs to be perfect, like a CD. But don't confuse the pre-screening video with a CD. The pre-screening video is to make it, to get in a competition where we want to see your personality and we want you to advance. And of course it has to be as perfect as we can, but that we're not looking for perfection. At least that's not what I'm doing, and I'm sure many of my colleagues agree. While I see perfect videos, and sometimes I still even have the doubt that they made some changes in the audio, you can't really tell. They can edit it. But that's not what the video, the pre-screening video is meant for. So what Professor Ungar said, leave the performance like it's a live performance. I would say do this in a pre-screening video for the competition as well. Because you have probably more chances to get in. It's crazy hard right now to get in, even to get in. It's incredibly hard. Much harder than when I sent my tape. You know what is a tape? I sent my tape to Cleveland.
I sent mine to Paris. Cleveland was live audition.
After
that.
Yeah, after that.
Yeah.
But that was like another world.
Yeah, it's completely different. Now, right now, also the number of applicants is so much higher.
It's crazy.
Like some competitions I hear, okay, there were 600 applicants.
Buzon.
Yeah, it's a stupid high number. But you're right. I mean, I say personally, the one issue that I have, and not to sound like blasé or not like who am I, but it's the problem is that there is so much perfection and so much of this is so boring. All the uniqueness, all those personalities, all that life doesn't come across if you just chase proficiency and perfection. And yes, in the best of scenarios, you get both. You can be as precise as you can, but make the music come alive, even through a recording, which is not a simple task.
Well, now the level is so fantastic that many people are absolutely perfect in the notes and inspiring in what they do.
I don't know about many, but fortunately several.
If you allow me.
And often they don't win.
I do want to say a story. It will take only 2 minutes, which is very apropos to all of this. There was, I'm sure there still is somewhere, the last interview of Horowitz, and it was done on commercial TV called 60 Minutes.
Oh yeah, I saw that, yeah, of course. And he plays the excerpts of the first sketch, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And so the scene is that the camera comes in, and there is Mrs. Horowitz, and he's doodling away and doing the same passage and everything. I recorded it on one of those tapes, the old type tapes. I had to record it. And this is really apropos to you and to all of us, all my life when it happened. So they talk about it, and Mrs. Horowitz jokes that you should got a deduction from your honorarium for the wrong notes you played, and of course, and he's smoking away. I don't know if you remember it. Anyway, so the interviewer is not a musician, it's obvious. He is a reporter. So at the very end, the camera is coming away, and he is saying, Mr. Horowitz, for a last question. And I'm sure that this last question was given to him at least weeks before. But Horowitz was always an actor. So when the question was, what advice would you give to the younger generation? And there is Mr. Horowitz, thinking. He knew the answer. But he's thinking, and then suddenly he says, good. And the camera goes away. I played that recording at least 25, 30, 40 times again. What does wood mean? And slowly at slow motion, fast motion, and it came out do it. It was so revolutionary. That means you do it. Do it. Don't worry about how somebody perceives it, or somebody might react to it negatively, or the rain will come down. Do it. That's each individual person who does it. It was fantastic because it liberated me. I don't have to answer to anybody. I'm doing it. It is so wonderful, and I hope, well, in front of these wonderful future talents, which you don't like, who said don't like the word talent? But anyway, future generation, that's what we are passing on to you. Do it. And
to lighten things up, if Horowitz had trademarked it, Nike couldn't have used it.
True, but it's there. I don't know where it is, but I was stunned.
And in order to do it, going back to Europe and America, there is one difference actually that I didn't think of. The students there, they have more opportunity to perform. Because Europe is different. There's many small towns where you can do concerts and everything. And so I see that they have more experience because they have the possibility to try what they learned in school. When I was here teaching, my students would play one recital, if lucky, per year, which is not what you should do, not enough, in order to do it, like Ursula said.
Which makes me want to say something else. You can create your own concert opportunities. There are many churches in every small town, and almost all of them have a piano. There are also recreation centers. There are also things, a concert does not have to be 2 hours long. A concert can be 30 minutes with some snacks served afterwards, and a chance for people to get together, for instance, and hear some wonderful music. And many of us have created our own series, and that's one of the most fun things to do, and people really like it. I mean, I've been saying on and on how important it is for people to get together in one room. And listening to music is one way, and just as coming to RPPF is a way of getting together in one room. So let's not be intimidated by the fact that there's Lincoln Center. There's probably a church within half a mile of here.
How about a retirement home?
What?
Retirement home.
Retirement homes, yes. And they all have pianos.
Yeah.
And they have many pianos, because very often people going into them.
Donated.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so on that note, I think we'll close this, but I wanted to say, just by way of just letting the word out, as some of you know, we're trying to create these RPPF satellite concerts, and we have some lined up for the school year. Just because of this, I mean, I think it's critical that people have a place to perform where you can take your old repertoire, try out new repertoire. We're not going to give anybody a whole recital, so there'll be 2 or 3 or 4, depends on what repertoire. But if you're interested in being a part of this RPPF satellite series, you won't get a fee. I think we have a donor that will pay for your transportation inside the United States, which is a great thing. It will come with home hospitality, no frills, but it's a chance to play. So we are launching these. You have to be willing to leave school probably for a weekend.
Do it.
Otherwise, you can't do it. But if you're interested, send a quick email to our RPPF office, because there's no way that I can contact everybody that's ever been to RPPF. We've got to start somewhere. So we're starting with last year and this year's bunch. So, I mean, I really felt bad when I was teaching at Easton all those almost 40 years. Then when they did away with the non-degree recitals, it was a huge drawback for the students. And I actually created a little Eastman concert series at a very nice retirement home, which is still going. But I know it's not so easy to generate your own concerts, but this will teach you how to do it also. To get people in the room and to make, if she could do it, I can do it. And that's one of the things I think is so important to get from gatherings like this. So, enough for now. Now, Professor Ungar and I are going to have a conversation about somebody we love very dearly, who is no longer with us, our teacher, George Shubbuck. And
Well said.
we've been wanting to do this for, I don't know, 50 years. Okay.
Right.